I hope that war dance was not to bring more rain.
No. Okay, so once again, everyone, welcome to Unitarian Universalist Church of Tullahoma. Our chalice lighting today is titled, "Blessed is the fire that burns deep in the soul." Blessed is the fire that burns deep in the soul. It is the flame of the human spirit touched into being by the mystery of life. It is the fire of reason, the fire of compassion, the fire of community, the fire of justice, the fire of faith. It is the fire of love burning deep in the human heart, the divine glow in every life. And then we will move on to announcements. Obviously, we won't be passing an offering plate, kind of hard to do over Zoom. But if you'd like to support the work of the church, you can send a check at P.O. Box 331, Tullahoma, Tennessee 37388. And then the other announcement that I have here is that the church reopening committee will meet after church next week, not today. We'll meet next week. Are there any other announcements? Chuck. Ugh. Chuck, you're muted.
I could do my whole talk that way and see if anybody noticed. But, Ricky also mentioned that when the AED finally gets in, he's arranged for Tenova Healthcare to come to the church and give a familiarization course free of charge for any who would like to attend. So.
That's assuming we're going to buy one.
Well, yeah, I guess it is. I don't know. I'm just the messenger.
Right.
But if we do, we can get training free of charge, is what it says.
Okay. Any other announcements?
Well, if Tom or Rick isn't going to say anything, I'm going to stop confusing people. It's now the Thursday night discussion group. So we'll be meeting on Thursday night at 7:00 by Zoom. If you are not a regular participant and you'd like to be, or even a one-time participant, and you need the Zoom link, just let any of us know. We'll send it to you. So.
Right. Yeah, I think
Hey, go ahead, Rick.
I think Ricky would also like us to remind everybody about the gathering at Tim's Ford, and if anybody can remember the date and would like to
May 8th. Yeah. May 8th.
Yeah, May 8th.
And he's looking for suggestions about things you'd like to do, and I think he's getting a lot of them, so don't be shy.
Any other announcements? I'm looking, I'm not seeing any hands, so we will move on. Okay, our reading today is titled All of Nature is Sacred by Lorelei Greenwood Jones. For the love of all began with the world. All of nature is sacred. Every creature is a thinking, feeling being. We are blessed with wondrous variety. We are part of nature and of every being on the planet. What we do to one affects the many. In this web of existence, we are each a strand. Our pushing and pulling moves the fabric of our world. Each bird and insect, each fish and four-legged creature, all are our siblings. Let us treat them as we would one another, with compassion and dignity, with understanding and honor. The love that we show each being radiates outward, a beam of kindness and caring that can be felt with the heart. And in turn, our hearts receive that love from each being, and it echoes onward to eternity.
Lucy had an announcement she wanted to make.
Okay, sorry, go ahead, Lucy.
Yes, thank you. Reminding you that the deadline for the April church newsletter is the last day of Wednesday, April 3rd. And if you can get information you want to put in the newsletter, called by afternoon if that's possible. And it's lucyboss@hotmail.com. So let me know if you have things you want added to that. Thank you.
All right, thank you. And now we will move on to our speaker. Our speaker today is Chuck Morgret, and his title is Nothing Sacred?
Good morning. First of all, I moved out here on the porch because it was likely to be the quietest spot in the house. It's a long story, but right now we have 10 dogs and 5 cats running around, and they tend to make a lot of noise. So, and then I had to rearrange a bit because the backlighting was terrible. This camera on this Mac is not good with lights behind you, so I had to move around. So I think I'm finally situated. So I will jump right in. My talk today has nothing directly to do, unlike a few of my previous or recent talks, has nothing directly to do with any pressing issues in the country or in the world. It feels good to finally not be so wrapped up in concerns over current events that I've been able to get back to thinking about metaphysical matters. So I have to start right off with my old disclaimer. My only real qualification to speak to you is that I think about stuff. A lot, probably more than is healthy. So I like to occasionally unburden myself of some of the things I've been thinking about, and in so doing, burden you all with them. Indeed, if you don't leave here today without a knot or two tied in your brain that you're going to have to figure out how to untie, I will not have accomplished my goal. You're welcome. One more disclaimer. My spiritual views are constantly evolving, and so my talks on such matters tend to build on previous talks. So if you've been paying attention, you may recognize some things I've said before. That's not a bug, it's a feature. I also have a tendency to want to wander off on tangents that I think are interesting, but that take me too far afield and often could be turned into one or more full sermons on their own. So here's how I'm going to try to avoid that. Think of this talk as me taking you on a drive down a freeway toward our destination, a specific exit that I'll name shortly. Along the way, we're going to pass a lot of other interesting exits, some of which we've been down before, and some of which might be really worth exploring in the future. We don't have time to get off at those exits today, but I'll try to point them out as we zoom past. Once or twice, I might not be able to resist going down an exit ramp, but if so, I won't linger and we'll get right back on the freeway. Now, I'm going to tell you right up front where we're headed. I'm going to assert that the distinction between secular and sacred is artificial, that the only difference between the reality in which we make our home being secular or being sacred is our point of view. It's a matter of how we choose to perceive it. And further, choosing to view this reality as sacred and act accordingly adds a lot to our appreciation for and our quality of life. I'm not saying this as an assertion of fact or as a proposition to be proven true or false. It's simply a matter of what lens through which one chooses to look at things. So the spoiler alert, the question is nothing sacred. The answer is everything is sacred if you choose to look at it that way. I'll go further and suggest that at the limits, this choice of viewpoint really doesn't depend on whether there is a God or not. That the words God and deity have such fuzzy definitions that divinity, like sacredness, is mostly in the eye of the beholder. Before we pull out onto the highway, I'm going to talk about a few terms that are notoriously hard to define. I'll start with metaphysics. Meta is a Greek prefix meaning something like about or beyond. So if physics is the study of physical reality, metaphysics means something like the physics about physics, or the study of the nature or meaning of reality. It's kind of a handy blanket term when you can't decide whether to call what's on your mind philosophy, religion, worldview, spirituality, or as Douglas Adams called it, the ultimate question of life, the universe, and everything. Secular refers to things that have no religious or spiritual basis. Sacred refers to things deemed worthy of reverence or respect, usually, but not necessarily, associated with religion or worship of a deity. I'm going to make the argument that it's being worthy of awe and reverence that makes something religious or sacred, rather than being religious in nature that makes it worthy of awe and reverence. Divine is related to sacred, but does usually more specifically refer to a god or gods, or to something godlike in nature. I'll assert again that there's so much leeway in the definition of God that at the limits, divinity may also just be a matter of viewpoint. Without even getting into specific religions, there are many types of religious stances, some with very subtle differences and corresponding words to describe them. I'm going to limit myself to 4 that are relevant to this talk and resist the temptation to go farther down that off-ramp and try to describe them all. Pantheism is the belief that God consists of all of reality, that reality and divinity are exactly the same thing. Not that God is in all things, that's another ism altogether, but that God is all things. Panentheism, on the other hand, is the belief that this reality is only part of God, or a manifestation of God, who also exists at a higher level transcending space and time. Atheism, broadly speaking, is somewhere on a spectrum between an absence of belief in deities and an active belief that there are no deities. Agnosticism, also broadly speaking, is somewhere on a spectrum between just not knowing whether there's a deity or deities to an active belief that that's unknowable. So another way to put what I'm going to try to convey is that it's possible to be an atheist or an agnostic and a pantheist at the same time. That whether divinity is everywhere or nowhere is just a matter of how we choose to relate to the reality in which we find ourselves. This realization was a light bulb moment I've come to think of as Epiphany number 7497. I'm just kidding, I don't actually count, and there probably haven't been quite that many. First thing I want to speak about here is I've titled this section Regarding the Universe with Awe. The universe in which we find ourselves is infinitely strange and endlessly fascinating. It's a far stranger and more complex place than anyone could have imagined even a couple of hundred years ago. During the Age of Enlightenment, scientific progress was rapid, and scientists and philosophers thought they were on the verge of pretty much understanding how everything worked, that the universe operated according to a fairly well understood set of natural laws. The religious view then in vogue was deism, the notion of God as the great clockmaker who had created the universe according to that set of physical laws, wound it up, and let it go with no further involvement. The view of a clockwork universe running along according to a fixed set of rules meshed well with the Enlightenment emphasis on reason and scientific inquiry as the path to understanding. As we now know, though, while the universe does indeed seem to follow a set of natural laws, they certainly didn't know them all or all their consequences back then, and neither do we. They knew nothing of subatomic particle physics, quantum mechanics, big bangs, quasars, black holes, DNA, genomes, evolution, relativity, and so on and so on. We objectively know that what we consider to be solid matter is anything but. that we are almost entirely composed of empty space, and that solids only seem that way because of properties of the way in which atoms and molecules are arranged. It's a very useful illusion. Intuitively, solids certainly seem solid, and it doesn't bother us at all that when we sit down on a chair, we don't go right through it. While there may not be miracles in the sense of phenomena that violate the natural laws of the universe, first, the very existence of those laws is, in a sense, miraculous. And second, part of the history of science is encountering violations of the laws of nature as then understood, and having to study further to change or expand our understanding of those laws to fit the new phenomena. As we learn more about genetics, microbiology, and neuroscience, it's amazing how incredibly complex just the question of whether we are shaped more by genetics or by our social environment is the long-running nature versus nurture debate. The more that complexity is understood, the more obvious it becomes that it isn't one or the other, but an incredibly messy interplay. Indeed, the more we learn about the natural world, the more we can appreciate how complex and interrelated all the pieces and parts of reality are, and the more obvious it becomes that the universe can only be understood as an interconnected whole. And thus, as our seventh principle states, as you use, we covenant to affirm and promote respect for the interdependent web of all existence of which we are a part. Is there anything beyond or outside the universe we inhabit? Is there a separate creator or a transcendent framework within which this reality exists? I'm not talking here about a multiverse or a higher dimension that we might someday discover exists and learn how to fit it into our physics and how to access it. I'm talking about something completely supernatural in the literal sense, so completely beyond human understanding that basic concepts like time and space might not even make sense. Can we possibly know? As a strong agnostic myself, I would assert that we can't. If we can't, and if it therefore has no bearing on how we should live our lives, does it even matter? Of course, what we believe about it can affect our lives, whether our beliefs are correct or not. There are several metaphors that basically define that transcendental reality, not as a conscious deity, but as a very vague notion of the stuff that reality is made from. Theologian Paul Tillich's definition of God as the ground of being is one example. Another is Buddhist monk Thich Nhat Hanh's metaphor of our transient existence as waves in the ocean. The wave begins and ends. The water of which it is composed does not. My late mother-in-law, Marge Luders, had her own similar view that we're like drops of water that leave the river for a time and then fall back and become part of the river again. When I was much younger and still felt the need to reconcile the many apparent contradictions between what I was being taught in church and reading in the Bible with what I was learning about the world around me, one of my early epiphanies, number 42, I think, was that I would be much more impressed by a God who could create a universe that after 14 billion years or so would lead to life on Earth, to the evolution of human consciousness, and ultimately to me, than I would be by a stage magician type of God who could just sort of wave a magic wand and make stuff appear, breaking all his own natural laws in the process. It was pretty much a deist way of looking at things, though I didn't know that at the time. In other words, I didn't believe in miracles in the sense of violations of natural laws, but I felt that the very existence of laws of nature that led to human consciousness was in itself a miracle. I still feel that way, irrespective of whether some deity or supernatural force created our universe, or whether it popped into existence for no reason other than just because. And if you're paying attention, you'll have noticed that we just successfully passed by a few of those intriguing exits without stopping. The next section I titled Regarding Human Awareness with Awe. The single most miraculous thing in existence for me is self-awareness, more specifically, my own self-awareness. Not to sound too much like Descartes, but I know that self-awareness exists because I am self-aware. My self-awareness is clearly not necessary to the functioning of the universe. It got along for 14 billion years without me, and I have no doubt it will continue on its course once I have moved on. So I consider my individual, unique self-awareness to be a miraculous gift, and I hope you feel likewise about your own. However, it's also clear to me that my consciousness is inextricably linked to this particular physical body on this particular planet. I can imagine my consciousness as a separate entity that can travel elsewhere on its own, but that doesn't make it true. It just proves that we humans have powerful imaginations. No, I only get this one consciousness with this one body, a single viewpoint out of over 7 billion just among our species on this one planet. But the difference between having none and having one is a bit like having no winning Powerball tickets and only having one. And while I think it unlikely, I won't rule out the possibility of my consciousness continuing on into some other manifestation and having a big happy reunion with the other consciousnesses I've known in my time here. Having experienced the miracle, to me, of being manifested once, having it happen again doesn't seem that big a stretch. Or as Thomas Paine put it much more wordily in The Age of Reason, which is perhaps the closest thing there is to a deist Bible, I trouble not myself about the manner of future existence. I content myself with believing, even to positive conviction, that the power that gave me existence is able to continue it in any form and manner he pleases, either with or without this body. And it appears more probable to me that I shall continue to exist hereafter than that I should have had existence as I now have before that existence began. The apparent mutual contradiction between free will or agency and determinism may just be also be a matter of point of view. I recall encountering a Christian rationalization that even though God endowed us with free will, thus making us morally responsible for our decisions, he can still be omniscient because he knows what choices we will make. He just doesn't want us to know, I suppose. It seems to me that if a conscious deity had truly given us free will independently of their own will, then that deity cannot know the outcome and very much does play dice with the universe. Or more precisely, each of us is a god, or at least has a godlike power. But the subject of free will is another one of those exits we're not going to go any farther down today. The next section is sort of tying it together. I call it Regarding the Unity of Ourselves and the Universe with Awe. Having discussed what I find awe-inspiring about the universe as a whole and about human consciousness in particular, I'm going to move on to the heart of the matter, which is the interconnectedness and indeed the inseparability of the two. The illusion that we exist separate from the rest of the universe can be a useful tool for survival, but it is ultimately an illusion. We've had a lot of discussions of what constitutes spirituality over the years, but for me, they seem to boil down to this. Spirituality is a sense of connection to something larger than or outside yourself. A spiritual experience is anything that triggers that sense of connection, and a spiritual practice is a ritual or habit that facilitates or opens one to spiritual experience. That sense of connection doesn't require that there be some sort of deity or supernatural element involved, but of course doesn't preclude the possibility either. I'm a practicing, if not exactly card-carrying Zen Buddhist, and as such, I have come to appreciate the Buddhist concept of non-dualism, or not self. That is, that the notion of a separate self is an illusion, that we are each an integral part of the universe and don't even make sense outside that context. A corollary of that view is that mind and body are one, and that we have no permanent, unchanging, supernatural essence separate from that. That is, of course, at odds with many religious belief systems, not just mainstream Christianity, that teach, rather vaguely, that the true us is really a sort of separate spirit self or soul that came from somewhere else, presumably some sort of soul factory or warehouse somewhere, is just inhabiting a body here and will go somewhere else when that body dies. A while back, while engaging in Zen meditation, I had a sudden flash of insight that I believe was probably what is called a Kensho experience. It was a deep realization, not an intellectual realization, but an emotional one. Difficult to put into words, but I will try. The feeling, as I looked out from this green porch here over the woods next to our house, was that I was exactly where I belonged, that I was home, meaning that I was a product of this reality, not a visitor from some supernatural realm, as rooted in this earthly home as were the trees I was looking at. And that feeling of connection brought with it a wonderful sense of calm and peace and belonging. I feel that if you really want to understand yourself, you have to learn to see yourself not as a fixed entity, but as a process or a story, as a verb rather than a noun in a sense. Yes, there is continuity in our lives, in our identities, but there's also continuous change. Without change, there's no life. This is an exit I've already been down, and maybe we'll revisit it one day, but for now we'll keep moving. The well-known poem Desiderata by Max Ehrmann assures us that you are a child of the universe no less than the trees and the stars. You have a right to be here. And whether or not it is clear to you, no doubt the universe is unfolding as it should. The National Lampoon parody of same, Desiderata, gives us the alternate view that you are a fluke of the universe. You have no right to be here. And whether you can hear it or not, the universe is laughing behind your back. But we are the universe made aware of itself, whether we are divine children of the universe or just flukes of the universe. We are miracles, even if we are in full compliance with the laws of the universe. Those very laws that somehow enabled our existence are the miracle. The fact that the natural exists is the supernatural event. And we share that miraculous nature with each other. Being the awareness of the universe makes us divine and thus worthy of mutual respect. A couple of quotes here. First, the full version of an abridged Annie Dillard quote found in our hymnal. We are here to abet creation and to witness it, to notice each thing so each thing gets noticed. Together, we notice not only each mountain shadow and each stone on the beach, but we notice each other's beautiful face and complex nature, so that creation need not play to an empty house. And a quote from Eckhart Tolle, you are not in the universe, you are the universe, an intrinsic part of it. Ultimately, you are not a person, but a focal point where the universe is becoming conscious of itself. What an amazing miracle. Maybe we actually are from somewhere else. Maybe when we become conscious, we do become attuned to some sort of cosmic vibration that uses our consciousness as a vessel to manifest in this reality. I don't really believe that, but I wouldn't call it impossible. The only thing is, given that unlikely possibility, I'd think it more likely that we're each a manifestation of the same cosmic consciousness instead of a bunch of independent ones waiting in line in that soul warehouse. So we're still all connected. Maybe in some sense, we're the eyes and ears of God and are here so that God can experience their own creation. Another Eckhart Tolle quote, what I know for sure is that I am a temporary expression in physical form of the one consciousness that expresses itself throughout the universe. I am not separate from that. If you're paying attention, you might see that this view is kind of compatible with Tillett's ground of being or Thich Nhat Hanh's ocean wave metaphors that I mentioned earlier. I'm about to go down an exit I've been down before, and I may explore again, but I'm just going to do a quick drive-through today. The Greek and Roman mystery religions seem to have inspired early Christian Gnosticism, and I think these are fundamentally misunderstood traditions. Little was known about Gnosticism until the Nag Hammadi scrolls were finally translated in the 1960s, well after their discovery in the late 1940s, which is a long story in itself. The term Gnosticism refers to secret knowledge that couldn't be written down, but was imparted only to those initiated into the inner circles of the tradition. But my impression after reading Elaine Pagel's book, The Gnostic Gospels, and other related references, is that these traditions were more akin to Buddhist enlightenment than to the secret rituals of fraternal organizations or modern cult-like religions. That the reason the knowledge or insight was only available to the inner circles is that it was something more experiential than intellectual and could only be fully understood after long practice. After researching Gnosticism for an earlier talk, including entertaining the admittedly far-fetched notion that Christianity actually originated as an ill-fated attempt to graft a mystery religion onto Judaism, I noticed a couple of things that made me wonder. When I read the Gnostic Gospel of Thomas, which is a collection of sayings of Jesus, many contained in the canonical Gospels and others not, with no narrative thread connecting them, and then later reread large parts of the canonical Gospels with fresh eyes, namely the parts that Thomas Jefferson cut and pasted into his The Life and Morals of Jesus of Nazareth, on which I did another talk. Something jumped out at me. There is some possible ambiguity in Jesus's teachings. It's possible that an intended message along the lines of, I have found the divinity in myself and no longer fear death, and if you learn to believe as I do, you can do it too, somehow got twisted into, I am divine, so if you don't want to die, you must believe in me. It's just a speculation that I may explore more fully another day, and let's get back on the highway. The bottom line is that it doesn't matter whether the miracle of our presence here arises from within this universe, or from some transcendental place beyond. It's still a miracle, and we're still divine. Even if the universe itself is a fluke, and the answer to Adams's ultimate question is just because, or maybe even 42, there's still plenty of mystery and wonder to inspire awe and reverence, even in a purely secular universe. Now, as I'm talking about my own religious beliefs, it's really not my intent to poo-poo those of others. For one thing, for many people, their religious faith provides them with needed comfort and hope in a scary and uncertain world. And perhaps they're right. My disagreeing with them does not prove them wrong. I think that there are also a lot of people for whom, consciously or unconsciously, their theological beliefs are helpful symbols, allowing them to put a face on the unknown. To all those who subscribe to theistic religions as useful avenues to pursuing truth, but feel that any specific personification of the all is just a useful metaphorical tool to help us comprehend the incomprehensible, while taking the literal details with a grain of salt, I feel you. Personification or concretization of abstract concepts helps make the ineffable relatable. Specifically, there are many Christians who, like a younger me, have found that the Bible couldn't be literally true in light of what we now know about the universe, and after trying hard to rationalize the contradictions, have realized that the only path forward is to move toward a more metaphorical interpretation of Christianity. One recent proponent is retired Episcopal Bishop John Shelby Spong, author of Why Christianity Must Change or Die and other works. Paul Tillich's 3-volume work, Systematic Theology, from which the ground of being concept came, is an earlier example. Of course, both Unitarianism and Universalism could be seen as roots of that particular tree. There are probably similar threads in other religions as well, and their proponents are almost certainly universally considered heretics. We definitely don't have time to go down that exit today, though. I will add that Thomas Paine, in The Age of Reason, after demolishing the idea that God would reveal his word for all time in a set of Bronze Age texts subject to misinterpretation and mistranslation, asserts that there is indeed a word of God, and that that word is the creation we behold. To those who do hold literal theological beliefs that I might find irrational, I'll say what Thomas Jefferson said. It does me no injury for my neighbor to say there are 20 gods or no God. It neither picks my pocket nor breaks my leg. Of course, if another's religious beliefs do cause him to treat me or other, this is not Jefferson now. Of course, if another's religious beliefs do cause him to treat me or others badly, based on who I am, how I live my life, or what I believe, that's another issue altogether. Frankly, nature produced us to survive, not to be rational beings. Sometimes rationality works best, and sometimes it doesn't. Irrationality just seems wrong to the scientifically minded among us and can drive us a bit bonkers, but that doesn't mean that those being irrational are any less human. Often, perhaps, they're actually more so. Life's hard. We all have to cope with that. Faith engenders hope, hope engenders persistence, and persistence engenders survival. And while it doesn't work for me, even a misplaced or overly optimistic faith can be useful for getting through life. So finally, we've reached our exit for today, and here's where we've arrived. Reality is only secular if we choose to see it that way. The mundane world is only mundane if we choose to see it that way. I prefer to see it Thich Nhat Hanh's way. Who would have suspected I'd slip in a Thich Nhat Hanh quote? People usually consider walking on water or in thin air a miracle. But I think the real miracle is not to walk either on water or in thin air, but to walk on earth. Every day we are engaged in a miracle which we don't even recognize. A blue sky, white clouds, green leaves, the black curious eyes of a child, our own two eyes, all is a miracle. If God is just another name for all of reality, then everything, the universe and everything in it, including you, is sacred. That is, worthy of being treated with reverence and respect. And of course, in accordance with our UU First principle, we should affirm and promote the inherent worth and dignity of each of our fellow travelers on this journey. So much comes down to semantics. There's no practical difference between a pantheist and an atheist who views reality with awe and respect. It doesn't matter whether we literally consider the universe somehow divine or just decide to treat it as if it were. The question isn't so much do we regard reality as secular or divine, but rather do we choose to regard the secular as sacred and endeavor to live accordingly. Everything becomes sacred if we choose to see it that way. And if we do, we can lead more joyous, meaningful, and fulfilling lives. As I asserted in an earlier talk, meaning is something we each must create for ourselves by striving to make the world a better place. The purpose of life is simply to create meaning. Even if you decide to choose that viewpoint, you can drift away from it, perhaps slowly, perhaps several times a day. But you can remind yourself to come back to it, to reconnect. It helps to find your own path for spiritual renewal. For me, mindfulness and Zen meditation work, as do my connections with my UU faith and family. Whether we are all part of a single manifestation or individual manifestations of the same reality, we can all see each other as worthy of mutual respect, and we can all treat reality and each other as sacred. Please treat each other as fellow travelers on this mystical, miraculous journey called life. Life's hard. Help each other through it and try to leave it better than you found it. And as always, thanks for listening.
Excellent talk. Thank you, Chuck.
Thank you. That was lovely.
Now for our closing. As we leave this friendly place, love give light to every face. May the kindness we will learn light our hearts till we return. And we will now take our coffee break. Let's see, it is 10:53, so let's come back at 11:05. That should give everyone time to go and get their coffee, do whatever they need to do. So we'll come back at 11:05 and start talk back.